Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and this will be our last show of 2025 and a chance for me to thank you for your support during this last year and, of course, answer some of your questions. So in case we're having a little tipple while we're drinking, I just mentioned the sidebar. I'm having a nice bottle of Black Sheep Ale that was a Christmas present from my niece, Cammy, and I've got a Quai des Brunes, a French beer, lined up later on. If I finish the first one, which I probably will. So as we're getting to the point where the year is closing, I thought I'd look back on some of the content we have aired on the channel and also tell a little bit about what we have planned for next year. As you know, as each year has passed on the channel, we've tried to acknowledge the 80th anniversaries as we go along, not exclusively. We talk about other eras of the war as well, but this year, we tackled the crossing of the Rhine back in the spring. We talked about the liberation of the concentration camps. We covered the end of the war, Potsdam Conference, things like that. So next year, as we look at 2026, we'll be looking back a little bit at 1946. Now, I want to be careful on this channel not to go too beyond the remit of World War II. As interesting as the next few years after the war are, I think if I go too far into that, it becomes something that the channel isn't supposed to be covering. I mean, ultimately, we're here to cover World War II. And then, you know, what point does it become something else? You have the various civil wars. You have the things happening in Indochina. You have Greece. You have what's happening in the Cold War beginning, et cetera, et cetera. But I will definitely cover some of the immediate post-war period. I want to look at the occupation of Berlin. I want to look at displacement camps again. I want to look at some of the initial situations that arose directly out of World War II. We're going to have a show, for example, about the British brigades going to Korea. But David is my guest, is who goes on talking about why the battles in India is going to be specifically looking at the tactics the British brought with them to Korea from World War II. So we're not looking at Korea specifically. We're looking at sort of the morphing of doctrine, if you like. So I really want to be careful to not go too beyond the remit of what the channel is about to be, but I think it is definitely worth covering that the official end of the war, which of course in Europe was May and then in the Pacific was August or September, depending whether you're British or American, didn't neatly tie up all these situations. Some of them took a year or two to conclude. So I want to cover some of that a little bit. But the other thing is that because we won't be covering 80th anniversaries, it gives me sort of carte blanche to go back and look at tackling subjects more from a sort of a thematic point of view. So where we would, for example, talking about, I just mentioned the crossing of the Rhine, or we were talking about the liberation of the camps, I can go back to more all-encompassing theme weeks like Holocaust Week or Infantry Week or Pacific Week, those type of things, or more sort of ambiguous titles like Morale or PTS or Syndrome, that kind of thing, or battles that swung on a decisive moment, or leaders that look at their careers over a series of battles. So there'll be lots of opportunity to kind of spread our wings, so to speak, because, as those of you who've been with me from the beginning, this was ultimately born out of COVID-19 and the fact we were all locked down and unable to do things. And that was 5 years ago now, nearly 6 years ago now. So I think it's time that the channel will kind of progress a little bit and free ourselves from the shackles of being obsessively stuck with rigid themes. I want to be more open with it, but not, again, as I say, not going too far into the post-war era. There will definitely be more war crimes content. I enjoyed the shows I did on that. We looked at the Pacific, we looked at the Australian way they dealt with the crimes. We tackled, Darren Little just mentioned Nuremberg. With the war crimes trials, I tried to avoid talking too much about the big, well-known Goering, and of course it's in the news again now with the Russell Crowe film, which I have not seen yet. And that's why we looked at war crimes trials in Norway. We looked at the trials around different parts of Europe. And definitely as we progress with that series, we'll be looking at trials in the Soviet Union, Norway again. We'll be looking at trials perhaps in Poland, Romania, things like that. So I don't want to get stuck too much in Nuremberg, because Nuremberg is but a part of the war crimes process. So I definitely will be going back into that area again. I've got some great guests, potential guests lined up for that. Mike Bechtold, the Canadian, had his book on air power in Normandy. We are arranging a set of shows over a couple of weeks. That'll be in January with the authors who contributed chapters to his book on Normandy. So I've yet to get down to the details of that with Mike, but that will be a set of shows about the various aspects he wrote about. So I'm sure some things like typhoons will come out again. The transportation plan will come up. ALGs, or air landing grounds in Normandy, will come up. The benefits of the air campaign, what got right, what was done well, what was done badly, that will definitely be covered in that series there. And then beyond that, we'll just deal with the various authors that come along with new books that are coming out. I'm in a position now where we're well known enough here that authors who've been on before, they will naturally contact me when their next book is coming out, and so there'll be opportunities to speak to people whose next book is coming out. That'll be really good. Yes, Scott, Dave Holland came on and gave us a presentation about Guadalcanal a couple of months ago. Well, I mean, Dave will definitely be back on again at some point in 2026. He's always great value. He's been doing some fantastic stuff on the unauthorized history of the Pacific channel with Seth and John Parshall. It was John Parshall's birthday yesterday, I think. John Parshall will be definitely on again. Yeah, the Chaplain show was really good with Tim Townsend, about the chaplain who was there ministering, whatever you want to call it, a religious, not comfort, religious practice, I guess, to the Nuremberg prisoners. That was a particularly good one. And I will do some questions with you later on. So I said in my little top of the show bit there, and this is a sort of trite thing to say, but I wouldn't be anywhere with this channel if you guys weren't watching, and particularly those of you who support me financially. So I'll just get that kind of, if you're not supporting me, please think about supporting me bit out of the way so we can get on with some questions. But it is, as I've talked about it on these Ask Me Anythings many times before, I'm never going to change my basic policy from putting everything straight on YouTube, everybody to watch at the same time. I don't, as you know, hold back the best content behind a paywall or for patrons only. Everything will always be available for everybody at the same time. But I am reliant on the goodwill and the generosity of the hardcore viewers to support me with Patreon donations each month or via YouTube membership. The Patreon system means I get more of the money you give. YouTube, they take a higher percentage, but I'll just put up the Q code, and the link is always in the description below to Patreon. So if you feel a bit flushed after Christmas, no one's feeling flushed after Christmas. Everyone's broke, so I understand that. But if anyone has perhaps let their subscription to other channels subside, and you think about wanting to help me out a bit, I'll put the QR code up there. So that takes you directly to my Patreon page, and there are various tiers and et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to get that out of the way pretty quickly. But at the same point, I couldn't do what I do without you guys. And it's not just the financial support. It's the very fact that you're there in the sidebar before I get here, you chat amongst yourselves. And I've had this conversation. You can all pat yourselves on the back very much now. I've had this conversation with other content creators about their regular viewers. And it seems that you guys are particularly good at both welcoming new people into the sidebar and also, to some extent, self-policing. We've all been there when someone comes in who starts off and they're being a bit combative, they're being a little bit, and aggressive, and you're very, very good at making these people understand that there's a sort of a politeness about being part of the World War II TV sidebar. Sometimes I let trolls stay a bit longer than perhaps they should, because sometimes there are people who have appeared to be a troll with their first comment, and actually they're not a troll. They've just come in a little bit unruly. And let's be honest, we're all of in a world where the internet, we're used to hostility. We're used to people saying things they wouldn't say to each other in person. And I think people sometimes bring the rules of the internet elsewhere into World War II TV, and then they realize that in World War II TV we are bit more like a friendly country pub. We will welcome people into the pub who are not regulars, but you have to kind of accept the rules of the regulars, and then you can come up and pull up a bar stool and have a beer with us. And I think I let sometimes the trolls make sure it's really clear they are trolled, and then they get swiftly blocked. But sometimes there's been some people who've come on to actually become regular contributors to the sidebar, who perhaps from their first comment we'd have gone, oh, dodgy, let's get rid of them. So I try and balance it when I'm watching a sidebar, and give people the benefit of the doubt. I also acknowledge the fact that not everybody is posting in their native language. Sometimes sarcasm can get a bit lost. Sometimes the tone gets a little bit lost. But I think because we've got a regular group of people from around the globe, we've got Dutchies and Yankees and Brits and Welsh people and Scots and Irish, is that you're all kind of good between you at kind of working out the tone of people and making sure that they play by the rules, abide by the house rules. And I think because of that, we've got a very good, thriving community. So I did want to say, thank you for doing that. It's one of the things that when I started this, and I had no plans for where it was going to go, it was literally a stopgap thing. And we had none of us, when we were dealing with COVID, knew when it was going to stop and it was going to end. And now it's become a thing that has become the main thing that is my main profession. I introduce myself now to French people as je suis un YouTuber. I am a YouTuber, because I'm now that way more than I'm a battlefield guide. I don't have time for doing battlefield guiding much anymore. And it's, and I had no idea that the community would develop in the way it did. I thought it would be much more of a, not impersonal, but coming from a world of battlefield guiding where you are talking to people, in the moment, you're making eye contact. I didn't think we'd be able to recreate that type of atmosphere in this environment where I'm talking to you via a screen, to however you're watching me on whatever your device is, on your phone, on your TV, on your laptop, your PC, your iPad, whatever it would be. But actually, I think it has become a really good community. I'm very touched by the fact some of you have met up socially. You send each other Christmas cards and greetings. You look out for each other when you're ill and your pets are unwell and all that kind of stuff. That's really good. So thanks to you for being that way. It's most appreciated by me. And as I said, some of the other channel creators kind of wish that their communities were perhaps a little bit less hostile and a bit more like the World War II TV community. So that's I doff my cap to you and how you are there. So let's dive in. I want to talk a little bit later on about some of my favorite shows of this year, and I want you to come up in the sidebar with what your favorite shows have been. I mean, definitely don't ask me which of the shows you haven't liked doing, because I wouldn't say that even if there were some that I didn't enjoy, because it's not fair. But actually, I don't really have shows I don't enjoy. There are some that I find the subject a little bit more interesting to me personally, because we can't all be interested in all aspects of World War II, and there are some bits of it that I'm less interested. I'm not really a big naval battle guy, if I'm being honest. That doesn't mean I cannot be incredibly spellbound when someone like John Marshall or Mark Stilley or someone that comes on and talks about naval battles, but it's not my kind of go-to area. I'm also not particularly into the technical aspects of changing engines in aircraft and that kind of thing. So, ground battles and people are probably my thing. But, I'm very proud of the fact that I've had really no shows I haven't enjoyed doing. And I'm also, and I've said this before, very proud of the fact that I will give people a platform, even if they are on the first rung, not only of their history career, but of their public speaking career, because it's something that takes practice, but the only way you can get better at it is by doing it. And you don't a band, you don't walk out onto the stage at the Royal Albert Hall in your first gig. You start off in a pub car park to two people and a dog, you know. And I can see certain guests I've had who came on early in their careers, who've gone on to things way beyond World War II TV, regular TV, et cetera, and I've seen that their skill sets have improved. And I'm not saying they were bad when they were on World War II TV, but like anything else, it's a progression. You know, as I said, you practice makes perfect, and so, you know, it's always going to be part of my mantra, my policy here, not to just have people who are the Roger Morehouses, the Tessa Dunlops, the James Hollands, those people who are on TV regularly, who know how to do it and can just do it without thinking about it. Yes, those people will always get a platform here, but I will also have the people who are not used to public speaking, have not delivered presentations in front of the general public before. And that means sometimes I do have to work a little bit harder to make sure they feel comfortable and to tease some questions out of them, because I say it's not something that comes naturally to anybody. You know, as a tour guide, speaking to the younger tour guides I do in Normandy, you know, you don't go out on your first tour, you know, like Laurence Olivier delivering Hamlet. You start off nervously. You have to build up. So it's always going to be important to me to give a showcase to people at the beginning of their careers or the early part of their public speaking. And again, thank you to you for making those people feel welcome. And we can all remember shows where the guest has clearly been a bit shy, clearly a little bit nervous, and yet the information is what counts. And very quickly, you guys realize that even if the person who's the guest is not that yet comfortable in this environment, their information is worth listening to, and it's a work. It's the audience, it's me as the host, it's the guest, and we work as a triangle to make sure things work okay. So there you are. I will mention some of my favorite shows later. I've got little bits of notes around here, but let's look at some of the questions that are coming in. So Ian T said, did you ever link up with Mike Somerville? Volume 1 on a Baton of Sherwood Foresters just came out. No, I didn't. Maybe he was someone I had on my list at some point. I definitely haven't had any contact with him. If you know him or you have contact details, kind of never feel you can't get in touch with people on my behalf. That would be most welcome. I would like to do more studies into British regiments, British divisions, and without mentioning any publishers by name, I have difficulties sometimes getting in touch with authors whose books are coming out with certain publishers. And I have observed that British newbie historians tend to be less good. This is the sweeping generalization, having a website or some sort of social media platform where people like me can contact them. And I think it needs to be understood that in these times we live, just releasing a book and it appearing in a catalog of books will not get guaranteed that people will A, buy it, and B, read it. And I think I would like to see more authors contacting not just me, but the other podcasters and YouTubers out there, and getting in touch and saying, I have a book coming out on the whatever it would be, 9th Battalion, Durham Light Infantry. Could I possibly come on and talk about it? As Mike Dichter did, although he hasn't got a book about the 4th Indian Division, he contacted me, and hence we had that presentation before Christmas about the 4th Indian Division. But it seems that American historians about particular American divisions, American units have more of an internet presence. It's therefore maybe easier for me to find these people, to contact these people. They also may be a bit more up and coming about contacting me. And you know, some people I've often been accused of doing too much British content, not enough British content, too much American content, not enough American content, too much Eastern Front content. It's the old thing about people saying that a newspaper is too left-wing or too right-wing. If you're getting both sets of criticism, you're probably doing about the right thing. And I do think, on balance, I'm looking at the war fairly equally from the different nationality points of view. I'd like to have a few more French guests. I'd like to have more Russian and guests from the Soviet Union, but then language becomes an issue, definitely, as I've told you before, Yugoslavia or the former Yugoslavia. But I think in terms of Brits, Australians, Canadians, Americans, Polish, I think we have a fair representation. But I would like to see a few more of these British authors or authors about British and Duke subjects have a website, have an agent, or just get out there and email people like me so that we can get them on the channel. I'll scroll through some of your questions. And yes, I did have a pretty good Christmas. Thank you very much. I'll have a sip of beer while I'm a Christmas beer, and then I'll come back to your questions. So there we are. He had a good question about the Ravage Kitty. How come you don't want to delay releases? It's just not the way I want to be. It does seem to be an accepted model to get more support financially, is to have content that people who pay get first. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way of doing things. I mean, there are marketing ideas that may work, but may not be, I'm not going to say morally acceptable. When I started this, so thanks for bringing the question there. When I started this, as I said a few minutes ago, it was during COVID. It was always born out of this idea of bringing people together to make our interest in World War II a group thing, a means of us sharing information with each other in real time. And so for me to now change and say, okay, no, people who are paying will get this interview with Greg Luther first, doesn't seem to work. Also, it doesn't work with the fact that 99% of my content is live. Now, I always feel a bit guilty that my live content, because of the time zones, is at a certain time of, I mean, I have, as you know, I have two main sets of times I do shows. Mostly it's this time now, which is 7 o'clock in the UK, 8 o'clock in Europe, and 2 p.m. on the East Coast of the USA. It's stupid o'clock in places like the Philippines. It's stupid o'clock in Australia. And then I do the other shows, which are like 10 o'clock in the morning for me in Normandy, 9 a.m. in the UK, which are in the evening in Australia and New Zealand, places like that in the Philippines. And then sometimes I do them maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon for me, which is more the evening in the Philippines. I wish I could have the intestinal fortitude to be able to get up every now and then in the middle of the night and do a show at like 2 o'clock in the morning for me or 3 o'clock in the morning for me that is evening in the USA, so that those of you who are working in the USA could watch a show live. But I don't know that I could. If I did it, it would have to be a kind of a one-off. But I think I wouldn't be if I went to bed at my usual time of 11 o'clock, 12, or I tried to stay up. If I tried to stay up till 3 in the morning and then appear here, I don't think I would be at my best. I'm not saying my policy of not having stuff behind a paywall is the correct policy in terms of success for the channel, but that it is my policy. It's what I want to do. It's also why I think we've not hit the massive numbers of views and the massive numbers of subscribers. Is the data seems to suggest that uploaded videos, so non-live, are picked up way better by the algorithm than live streams. And that the evidence for that is the channels that do both. If you're an avid viewer of history content on YouTube, and you look at some of your favorite channels and look at the viewer figures for their uploads, so let's say they upload an hour-long video about a battle, and then look at a video the week later where there's a live discussion of a battle, it's usually the case that the live discussion will have had a quarter or so of the views of the uploaded video. So it's not about the interest of the subject. It's not about the time of the day. Even people try and, like, in a sense, beat the algorithm about when to upload stuff. It just seems that the live stream content is not as well supported by the algorithm. The problem is, I love the live shows. You love the live shows. I love the fact that I'm talking to my guest, but I'm also talking to you guys there in the moment. And those of you that are here can join in the conversation. For me, and this is all just entirely my own feelings, and I'm not, everybody has a different method, and there's JD doing his stuff in History Underground and Rob at History Explorer, who mostly do uploads, and World War II Wayfinder, great content out there. For me, I like that interaction. I like the fact that we're here together and we're exchanging ideas in real time. I sometimes wish I could be a viewer of my channel as well, instead of the host, because I would be thrilled that I can watch one of the heroes I have in history and be able to see other people put questions to that World War II historian hero and see that question answered in real time. So if I have, for example, let's say Victoria Taylor on, for example, when me and Matt Bone interviewed her jointly for our channels, and we can say to Victoria Taylor, here are some questions of viewers, and a viewer says, did the Luftwaffe have this, this, and this? I think that's fantastic. Because even if you attend a conference where there's a talk happening and there's a guest historian or presenter giving it, there's normally not that much time for questions at the end. If someone is talking for 55 minutes, maybe there's 5 minutes for questions. If you've been to We Have Ways or Chalk Valley, there's always some time for questions. But you can't have, basically, you lot can ask questions during the entire hour and a half of the show. Of course, we won't answer them all. We will only answer a fraction of them. But those that we do answer, at least you're getting an answer to. And of course, you guys in the sidebar are very good at answering the questions as well and having a debate about the subject yourselves. So it's very good. There you are. I will carry on looking for your questions. Gary asks, you have met many World War II vets in the past, maybe a little bit of self-indulgence, a few brief highlights of memorable meetings and conversations with them. I mean, where do I start? It's just been the luck and privilege of where I've been living and what I've been doing. So on the top of my head, and don't ask me to remember which years these events were in, because it all is part of a blur now, but it probably about 20 years ago. I remember being sort of south of Caen for the Operation Total Eyes anniversaries, and the veterans of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry were over. So Ken Tout, who wrote A Fine Night for Tanks, and some of his fellow crewmen there. So we were at St. Agnan de Craminil, and Mag, if she was watching, would crucify me for how I pronounced that French name, and the town of Santo, and it's between those two towns where MW, I refuse to say his name, got shot up the arse, well, shot in the side by either the Canadians or the Brits on August the 8th. But being there and being able to put questions to Ken Tout and the fellow crewmen, I mean, there were about, I guess, a dozen veterans of the unit there. I don't think all of them had fought in that battle. I think 2 or 3 of them were replacements, maybe after the Normandy campaign, and there were some sons and nephews and wives and stuff of other veterans. But that stands out. Days and days I spent on the battlefield with Don Burgett, A Company 506th Currahee veteran, Harold Baumgarten, B Company 116th 29th Infantry Division, spent time with him. Veterans on Omaha Beach, veterans on Sword Beach. My great uncle Cyril of the 2nd Battalion Royal Officer Rifle was spending time with him in Combon Plain, where he fought in June and July 1944, was very memorable. As I get older, though, and thanks, it was a good question. I think sometimes it's more the life advice. Not that they were ever. I don't think I've ever met a veteran ever who felt they were, here's my lessons for life, son. I don't think any of them were that arrogant that they were considering themselves wise. It would be me who would consider them wise or consider that what they were saying was worth listening to. I think they were always to a man, to a woman, very humble, very, very downplaying mostly of what they did in World War II. And I don't know that I can give you any examples of things they said. I mean, one I will give an example. Just I said I won't give an example. Then I thought of one. I may have said this before. If I have said it before, I apologize. I have another sip of beer. Hang on. Bear with me for a few seconds. Talk amongst yourselves. So I was with, name dropping, I was with Wild Bill Garnier. So Easy Company 506, lost his leg in the Ardennes, of course. And I knew Bill pretty well. He, I would call him in South Philly. He called me a couple of times and we'd have a laugh. And he signed his book to me. To a limey bastard hiding in Normandy was his joke. He always made a joke that because I wasn't living in England, that I must have therefore been on the run or something, that I had committed a string of crimes or something, and I'd left and I was living under a false, name or something. And that was just his, for the record, I have not left a string of unsolved murders in England. I'm here under my own name. I was born under this name, etc. But that was his joke. So his hiding in Normandy comment was sort of referencing the fact that he thought I'd done a runner from something. Anyway, he was on a big group. And the group were in the museum at Saint-Côme-du-Mont, the Dead Man's Corner Museum, as I still call it. It's now the D-Day Experience, but to me, it'll always be the Dead Man's Corner Museum. And he'd done the museum before. And also it was when it was just inside the little building on the corner. So it wasn't the big place it is now with the flight simulator and what have you. And it had stairs going up, and on his crutches, he found the stairs and stuff a bit difficult to navigate, especially with crowds. It only took one person to trip over his crutch, and he'd tumble. So he was sitting outside on the wall and also he couldn't smoke if he went inside a museum, and he would always have a cigarette. And we were sitting outside on the wall having a cigarette, and I very rarely, to be honest, did I ever formally interview veterans. A few times. There was one guy, Donald Elgar, who was an LCVP coxswain on Omaha Beach. I remember I took a little camera down and I sat him in the lobby at the Churchill Hotel. I sort of formally interviewed him. I did that 2 or 3 times, maybe 10 times, but mostly it was just, over dinner, over lunch, in the evening, on a tour, you'd just sit and talk. And I was talking to Bill about the Battle of Bloody Gulch, so June the 13th. And I've always maintained, and for those of you who've toured with me, back in my Band of Brothers tours days, I've always maintained that the very notion that F Company fucked off and let everybody down on June the 13th is utter nonsense. They were knocking out Marders and self-propelled guns. They were holding the line, and the treatment of Thomas Mulvey, the commander of F Company, being sort of ousted from lost command of the company is a terrible tragedy. I digress. But I was talking to Bill about this battle there, and he of course was with E Company in that battle, and you see him depicted in the TV show in episode 3, and he was talking about seeing Germans coming down the railway line across the field, and Harry Welsh and Jack McGrath knocking out the Stug. That, of course, is shown in this TV series. And I was making a point, not in sort of some smug, let me tell you about the real story. We were mates at this point. We were just chatting, and I said, the thing is, though, Bill, is that because he said, "Oh, F Company weren't on our left." I never did find out where they were, and he wasn't knocking them. He was just explaining it from his point of view. He didn't know where they were. And I explained. I think I got out my maps and I showed him where they were. I talked about what they're up against. And I talked about Bob Moody knocking out a Marder and all that stuff. And I said it would be fair to say, Bill, that F Company certainly had a tougher day than your company had that day, and they were in a position where they knocked out a significant number of armored vehicles and blunted the spear of the German counterattack of 17th SS and the Fallschirmjäger into Carenton. And your position, I said, was important. You were on the right-hand flank, the Germans coming on the railway line, but I wouldn't say that yours was the pivotal one. And he might have kind of pushed back at that and said, well, you weren't there. And I have had veterans say to me and friends of mine, well, you weren't there. It's very difficult to know what to say when a veteran who was there says to me, who wasn't there, you weren't there, because it's a bit of an ace to play, to be, and as the historian, you then go, well, the war diaries state that, you may know you have a sort of a strong position, but you are talking to someone who was there. So you have to absolutely offer them the respect for the fact that they actually were there. They were being shot at, and I wasn't. So anyway, so I explained all this to Wild Bill, and Bill could be coarse and vulgar. I mean, he was hilarious. I mean, the times in my life I've come close to pissing myself laughing have been with Eddie Izzard on stage, Billy Connolly on stage, and with Bill Garnier in person. I mean, so funny. And he said, every soldier thinks he's in the muddiest foxhole. They're in the worst part of the attack. They've got the nastiest sergeant major shouting at them. They've got the most shells exploding over their heads. They've got the most armored vehicles coming down at them, every one of which is a Tiger and an 88, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, it's the historian's job to rank it all, he said. And he took on board what I said about F Company really, really well. And we had a really good, informed conversation. Me, someone who'd studied it and walked the battlefield, him, someone who was there for one day, saw his mates get killed and wounded, and we had a really constructive conversation. So that was a long answer to your question there, Gary. I've also had moments, of course, with family members. I remember taking the son of someone who was killed with Thomas Howie's battalion pushing into Saint-Lô in early July, and taking the son to where his father was almost certainly killed. And, you're walking down the little track there from Martinville Ridge, east of Saint-Lô. And I kind of think to myself, what am I going to say when I get there? How am I going to word, I think that's where your dad was killed, and at what point do I be the historian? At what point do I be someone sympathetic to someone whose dad was? You're playing through the various scenarios, and in all the cases I've had these experiences, it's never been, I've overthought it, and when you get there, it always works out fine. They're grateful to be there. You have a nice exchange. Sometimes you give them a moment or two of silence. Sometimes they ask you questions. Sometimes they don't ask you questions. But it's never been an issue as such. It just always seems to work. It finds its way of doing it. But that can be quite a interesting experience dealing with family members. So that's if I think of any more veteran stories, well, a random one just came to my mind. I was with a family from the UK, and they had two veterans with them from two sides of the family. So these veterans didn't know each other in the war. They were the grandparents and only came together because of a marriage between the next generation. And one was a commando veteran, Army commando. I feel he was 6 commando. He might have been 3 commando. It was many years ago. And the other guy was in a less obviously war-winning role. He was Royal Army Service Corps, Royal Army Ordnance Corps, something like that. And not only had they had different types of war, the commando guy was quite open about his experiences. From the minute I introduced myself, they introduced themselves to me, I introduced myself to him in the van. He was, he brought his beret with them, and we were talking. He said, are we going to see where I landed on Saw Beach? Are we going to see the push? He said, yes. He's very chatty, very open, and not arrogant, but just very, very forthcoming. What was clearly in the right frame of mind to be on the tour, understood what the process was, understood it was important for his family. The other guy was much quieter, much more restrained. I could barely get out of him what his unit was, and his daughter was trying to say, "Come on, Dad, say." And each time, because the other guy had landed on Juno Beach, a Brit who landed on Juno Beach with, I think it was Royal Army Service Corps. I feel it was Royal Army Service Corps. So as we get to each stop, I'm trying to bring both veteran stories into. I don't want to focus on just the commando. I'm trying to be all-encompassing and try and talk about the general landings, the general state of play of the British landings and the Canadian landings, but also make sure both these veterans are appreciating, and also keeping it informative for the rest of the group who weren't there and weren't me, who had to be kind of led through by the hand about the whole how did D-Day work. You have a range of levels of knowledge. Anyway, where the commander had been talking quite graphically, and he'd been talking about, it was one point on deed, I think he was cut off, or he lost sight of, he was scouting ahead, or had been sent through a backyard to check something. And there was a moment where he lost the rest of his commando troop. And for those few, he said it was probably a few seconds really, but it felt like minutes. He was terrified. And then he saw a green beret going off into a wood, and he kind of scurried off and joined up his unit, and he was very honest. Anyway, the other veteran, just nothing. I was trying to bring him in. Any memories of this? No. Do you think you came through here? I don't know. I don't remember. And then suddenly, well, not suddenly, we stopped in Courcelles to have lunch. We were on Juno Beach, and we were having lunch, and because we were trying to pack a lot in, we were getting from the like a food store, food truck, you call it these days, on the quay there, and we just had sandwiches, jambon fromage, that kind of stuff. And then we all sat, so it was me and 6 or 7 of this British family with the 2 veterans on these benches, looking at the Searle River. The Searle River comes out in Courcelles, and the Royal Army Service Corps veterans. So I just remember something about being here, and so we all like, oh wow, great. And we thought it was going to be something, or we not thought, we kind of hoped it would be something. I saw all these ships, or I remember hundreds of trucks piling up here. But no, he remembered, and the memory that just came out, and he didn't know, he'd forgotten he had this memory. And if we laughed, if though it's not really funny, I mean, it sort of is. Anyway, there was a dead cow slowly floating down the quay, down the river. It obviously come over the sluice gate or something. And he said, me and my mates, we were just waiting for something to happen. And we had, there were some bits of rope. It's a fisherman's rope lying around. So while this cow was slowly floating down the river, they all kind of quickly tied up like little coil loops of rope, like hoopla we play at the fairground. And they started throwing like quoits. They to see if any of them could get it over the cow's leg. And if they got it over the dead cow's leg, they won the game, like darts. And they're all throwing these quoits, and they're throwing bits of junk and stuff at the cow, and blah blah blah. And eventually, one of his mates got a coil of rope around the dead. They weren't trying to lasso it. They weren't trying to bring the cow ashore. They were just trying to get it over the cow's legs. And then the cow kind of, I don't know whether it went off into the sea. Please don't send me letters about what happened to the cow. Anyway, it was just a randomness. And that was basically the only story he remembered all day. Because I thought it would, I was going to say, open the floodgates, because open the sluice, literally open this. And suddenly now one story was coming out. They'd all come out now. And you talk about, driving supplies up the front. And no, that was the one memory that came out all day. So there we are. That was a completely random story there. So yeah, so another question here about early content for members. No, I don't want to do it. It may be a sound business idea, but I don't want to do it. I want to do all my stuff live for everybody, regardless of how it works. I just hope that those of you who think what I'm doing is a good thing will be prompted to put your hands in your pockets and become a subscriber first, and then a YouTube member, and hopefully, ideally, a patron, so that I can keep on doing what I'm doing. So there we are. Let's have a go through and find some more questions. It's a good job you don't have a true crime channel, Woody. The amount of conspiracy theories out of control. It's a good point, Gordy, and I do get a fair number of what we would kind of loosely call conspiracy theorists or counter reality theorists. Every now and then on a video, I'll get someone saying the wrong side won in World War II. Churchill was the big villain, blah, blah, blah. You get those ones every now and then. I get, of course, you get Holocaust denial ones, although I don't get them in anything like the numbers other people get. I get FDR knew about Pearl Harbor, that kind of thing. But I don't get much of that stuff. So that's good. It doesn't mean I want you to all start giving me more things to react to, test my patience a bit more. I was watching an interview with JD from History Underground, my friend JD, who's being interviewed by a Gettysburg podcaster or YouTuber. And he was saying, you know, that his policy, and he has a much bigger channel than me. I hopefully, maybe, fingers crossed, I'll reach that 100,000 subscribers in 2026. It's been a long time coming. He says, you know, I don't let people I don't know on the internet bring my day down. And I think that's very good words to live by if you're a podcaster or YouTuber, because you can get into the cycle. Even if you've had 99 positive comments, someone will just, you know, say, you know, that, oh, you're shit at this or whatever it would be, you know, and I just delete anyone who's abusive. If anyone calls me or my guests a name, if you know me and you want to call me a name, fine. If Rob Crane wants to be sarcastic in a post and a sidebar, that's fine. But if you don't know me and you start calling my guest an idiot or me a so-called historian, just fuck off, you know. So there we are. Let me carry on down with some more questions. And there we are. Let's get some more questions there. There's not many questions coming in. And please, if you can put Q at the beginning so I can find them easily. Oh yeah, one from Andreas. What book you read in 2025 crashed most of your World War II beliefs? I don't think anything has absolutely, you know, been a complete, oh my God, that has changed things. I think, you know, without sounding arrogant, I've done enough of these shows with enough variety of guests that there's not much that completely shocks me. I really appreciated Charlie Stewart's analysis of the Battle of the Bulge. I enjoyed Timothy yesterday talking about Barbarossa. I don't think there's anything that's come this year that has absolutely, you know, oh my God, that book completely changed the way I think about World War II. Some of them have absolutely given me cause to reconsider my views. I really enjoyed both the show I did with Richard Vinan and his book, The Last Titans, about de Gaulle and Churchill's relationship. That was one I particularly liked. But I don't know that anything has absolutely, you know, thrown me this year. It doesn't mean it won't happen again. I think in the earlier couple of years of the show, when I was, you know, if you've been following this since the beginning, you will have seen me progress, I hope, from being a Normandy guy. And yes, I will continue to bring things back to Normandy because that's my backyard, literally my backyard. I live in Normandy. It is my first frame of reference. It's where the majority of my knowledge kind of starts with one foot in Normandy. But you've probably seen me, as you yourselves, if you've been part of me on this journey, you've seen, you know, your interest in the Eastern Front and the Pacific and then the wider war has increased. Some of you have come to this because you're naval experts, so you like the war in the desert. Trevor Sheehan, for example, is a Tunisia man. You know, I've come through to be able to, you know, in a pub, follow a conversation, join in a conversation about most aspects of World War II now. So, you know, I'm less likely to have something that totally threw my idea, through my thinking in a 180. But I mean, yesterday was a challenging show, and you can see in the comments after the show, you can see that some people just have just opened themselves up to the fact that Timothy suggested some things that were really quite radical yesterday. Okay, yeah, let's just allow this opinion to come in there, and we'll try and absorb it. Some people, Scott Grimwood, who I think is in a sidebar. I think Scott was a little bit more arms folded, yes, a little bit, yes. Well, we'll see what you. I mean, and that's fine. That's a good position to be in. Other people were very fiercely, no, this guy is wrong, you know, and all of those positions are valid, and we've all been in those positions in all times. But I like to see people, even during a show, their reactions bounce around a bit. Oh, I agree with that. Or I don't agree with that. That's life, folks. I wouldn't. I said it on a comment, reply to a comment a few weeks ago. The last thing I want is for all of you to agree with everything that every historian says on my channel. That means I'm failing. failing's a strong word, but that means that I'm not tackling subjects with enough historical rigor. I'm not here to just, read out Wikipedia entries of established, long-standing views about World War II. I'm here to rattle the birdcage. I'm here to, and some of my shows are less challenging. Sometimes the guest is more traditional in their views and no less historian for them. And sometimes they really kind of know I've got something to say about this. And it would be absolutely wrong for all of you to like and appreciate the opinions of every guest, because there's obviously always a factual grounding to the shows, and if someone's got their facts all over the place, then that would be a problem. But an opinion is subjective. An opinion can't be wrong. If I think my favorite thriller of the 1950s is the Sterling Hayden Stanley Kubrick film the Killing, that's an opinion. If I think my favorite group of the 70s is the Damned, and it is my favorite group probably of all time, it's subjective opinion. So sometimes people saying that they think a general is good, that's an opinion. By definition it can't be wrong. If they claim that a general was at a battle that he wasn't, that's a mistake. But opinions are opinions, and that show last night was an example of one that challenged things. And there you are. So yeah, Terry Down says, under his pseudonym Alan, did a fantastic show about the 50th Tyne-Tees division. I love the people who aren't professional historians but have done great work in less known subjects. It's also great to see the younger scholars. Absolutely. And that's why they will always get a platform here. I don't want to just come out with the Jonathan Dimblebys and the Craig Simons and those Helen Fry all the time. They will always have a place if they want, but I want to be able to give the younger people and the newer people and the young. A historian can be a new historian even if they're not young. There are people who are turning their attention to history upon retirement, who are, just because someone's in their 60s doesn't necessarily mean that they've done public speaking before, that history is something they've been doing for decades. There are some, but some people, it is a new branch of their career as a post-retirement thing. So youth is not the only metric with regards to new historians. There are elderly new historians as well, who are all just as not competing on different rungs of the same history ladder. Ian is saying he thinks in 2025, Woody, you have raised the bar. Quality has been superb. Yeah, thank you. I've pretty good. I think it's been pretty good. And there'll be lots more that will come that will give people an idea. Let's go about find some more questions. Yeah, you said you gave me his email. If you gave me his email, I probably did email him, Ian, and then maybe I didn't get a reply. If I that we're going back to the show about the Sherwood Foresters. I have a habit of, if someone gives me an email, I pretty much follow up on it quickly. So I probably didn't get a reply, or maybe the reply went into spam, or my message to him went into spam, which can sometimes happen. Let's go for some questions. I have had people with awful stage fright. I mean, I saw Rob Crane's message. I can tell when I log on and they're there. I can tell when someone is scared shitless, and you just, I never say, oh, by the way, you look like you're scared shitless, because that they know that's how they feel. I treat them all exactly the same, and I probably talk too much. I basically try and deflect by chatting about something and just using up the time until the show is going. I make sure they know how to operate the slides, and so you just use left and right arrows and blah blah blah. I'll put questions up on screen like this and that kind of thing. So yeah, I've had people who are noticeably nervous. I've also had people, I think, who are so chilled, so relaxed. I've become nervous. It's that they're treating it almost flippantly, but that's fine. And we all deal with these things in a different way. I would not want to be in a position where I don't have a little bit of stage fright, a little bit of butterflies, like today, as it gets to like half an hour before, I'm like, oh God, I hope I don't, forget how to use my mouth. I hope the sentences come out better. And some days I just feel that I don't do as well as other days. And some days I feel I'm kind of on my game as a football player or something. You have your good games and your bad games. Yes, yes, but I like the show. That was the one about Greenland. Was it's one of the ones I noted. I noted down about 20 or 30 shows on post-it pad notes of shows that I particularly enjoyed. And I don't have a criteria for shows I particularly enjoy. Sometimes it's a rapport with the guest. Sometimes because it's the subject is something new to me. Sometimes it's because it's not new to me, but I've liked the angle they've come at. As I said, I've never had a show I haven't enjoyed on some level. Some I enjoy more than others. Some guests I connect with on a more kind of go to the pub level with others. But there's been no absolute failures. Kevin, hello, Kevin. How are you? I haven't mentioned gliders yet. I've corrected that now by saying I haven't mentioned gliders yet. So I have now mentioned glider. That's four mentions of the words glider in about a minute. So there we are. How do I find creative content, large subjects, normally market garden, about the boat? Well, I mean, mostly people come to me now, or people come via, have you contacted this person yet? I don't do that much cold calling these days. So it kind of went through a series, a progression. And then when I started, I literally just went to friends. I went to, Alex Kershaw and James Holland and the people I knew and John McManus, and just had them come in, and a few Normandy guides I knew, Marty Morgan. And then as I had to find more guests was when I would then go to guests' websites and use the contact me, button, or I'd send them an email and say, hello, my name is Paul Woodadge. I run a YouTube channel. I have guests coming on talking about a variety of subjects. And they would reply, or they wouldn't reply sometimes, or they would reply later, whatever it would be. I still do that a bit, but mostly these days, it's people coming to me, or it's an agent coming to me, or it's a viewer coming to me. So there was one of the war crimes shows. I forget which one it was now. It was one guest came via a recommendation from a viewer, and then the guest suggested another guest, and then another guest came out of that. So like a dominoes falling. So I don't have to really worry about it now. There are publishers I wish I had more contact with, who I wish. What happens is you email a company, a publisher, and then someone emails back. I'll call them Jim for the sake of it, and then a few months later you do a message to Jim, but Jim, the email comes back unreturned because Jim's left the company, gone on to someone else, or Jim is now dealing with something else. So you keep reaching with the particular company I'm thinking of, kind of dead ends in that. And yet there are other agents. There's a particular lady I work with, Osprey, who is fantastic, who will tell, here are the books we've got coming out this year, which are the guests you'd like to be in touch with. Some of the authors regularly contact me, so I don't have to worry about it really. What is the issue is kind of finding time to kind of get my head down and start thinking about, right, what am I going to do this month? What am I going to, and I have to work that around, my schedule and Mag's schedule and any travel I want to do and conference I want to do and things like that. So, and the things the guests have to do. So, that's not really a problem, finding things. We've done shows on this. There's people talking about shows that we've done about Italy. We've done shows about North Africa. About my kitten. I got a new kitten for Christmas. KO, short for chaos. I was going to call her Smudge, and I think I might still call her Smudge as a nickname, but actually she is chaos, so we're calling her KO. She was here just before I started the show, and then she fucked off. She's not being naughty right now, so I expect she's stopped somewhere to sleep. At some point I'll bring her in. Well, if she wants to come in. She doesn't do what she doesn't want to do. She may only be 3 months old, yeah. There's Anthony's asking about Italian shows. JD put something on his Facebook page, I think, a couple of weeks ago about the rather clunky way that YouTube lists its shows in its playlists, right? And the way it's not so much the playlists doesn't work as a concept. It's the way you set categories up. When you go to my page on YouTube, there are various headings, and it's the way the algorithm works. And if I've just created a playlist, that one comes up before one that I created 4 years ago. That even if the one 4 years ago has more content, YouTube has an unusual way of kind of putting stuff up there. Oh, I think I just heard Chaos arrive. She's just arrived. It's like if people heard about you. This is KO. I'll try and hold her still enough. This is Chaos. She's my new cat. And it's a very cool story. And for those who don't know, so I'm going off World War II right now. My stepdaughters, Chloe and Maddie, live in Grenoble, the other side of France, and they heard mewing in a bin 3 months ago, a recycling bin. And there were 3 kittens that were tiny. I mean, like they'd literally been thrown in there by some wanker who wanted them to die. And we don't know who it was. I mean, they were so young, and they took them to the vets immediately, and the vets were like, well, we're not, they may or may not survive, and one may survive and one may not, and one may struggle. But anyway, the girls and their flatmates basically spent the next few weeks hand feeding them every hour or so, and milk and pipettes and stuff like that. And well, they all survived. And my 2 stepdaughters are keeping one each. And Chloe, my eldest stepdaughter, brought Chaos to me for my Christmas present. So there you are. That's my new cat. So there's Muffin, Charlie, and KO. What was I talking about? I was talking about you can make what I was talking about. Oh yes, the playlists. So it's a bit clunky, but basically, if you want to find more content about the Mediterranean, there's a playlist called North Africa and the Mediterranean. There's one about Italy at war, which will be mostly about Italian forces. Then there's Italy in World War II, which is about fighting in Italy. And so most shows I do will fall into several categories. So one with Craig Luther, for example, about Barbarossa, or about Guderian, let's say, would be in the Eastern Front playlist. It would be in the Third Reich and German Forces playlist. It would be in the Tanks and Armored Warfare playlist. It would be in the Leaders and Leadership playlist, etc., etc. But people do find it difficult sometimes to find the older shows or find other subjects. It's just the way YouTube works. And there's not much I can do about it except just kind of search for things you're interested in, and you'll find stuff. And don't assume I haven't done something. I might not have done it. By the way, just there'll be definitely some shows coming about weather on the channel. I've made a couple of contacts in the last year or so with people who've done various sort of studies into the weather on D-Day, how weather was used for intelligence planning, how weather affected battles. So there'll be various shows about weather in the next 12 months or so. So that's interesting that came up in the sidebar there. Let me have another sip of beer and I'll look for some more questions. Yeah, you seem to just be listening to me ramble rather than asking questions, which is good. Let me go through and find some more. A bit of praise from a viewer there. Woody is one of the channels who did not use AI and actual primary secondary sources via his guests, and much needed these days. Yeah, I mean, I have had the criticism, and it's valid, that if I have a guest on, such as Timothy yesterday, talking about the Eastern Front, is that he doesn't necessarily cite all his sources in the presentation with me. but of course they're all in the book, you know. And the thing about my YouTube description, right? Bit of information is I'm limited to, I think it's 5,000 characters or something. So by the time I put here's the link to the playlist, here's what the show is about, here's the historian's biography, here's the links to the book, here's the links to that, I don't have time in the description. I don't have space, sorry, to list all the sources, because it would just, YouTube wouldn't accept it in the description. So even if I wanted for each show to say, here are is the bibliography, here are all the archives sourced, there's no space in the text for the description to put that anyway. It's also, I mean, Jim Walsh, for example, is often, I've noticed he's often asking, where do these photos come from? Which archive is this? Perfectly valid questions. And the reason I don't often put them to the guests is I just think it derails the conversation. If each time we talk about where the photo comes from, we're kind of, it's a valid question. I'm not saying you can't ask that, Jim. It just, it doesn't feel that it's progressing the conversation forward. Sometimes a general question about, you know, which archives you've been using. But again, if you buy the guest's book, all the photos that the guest uses on the show that are in the book will be sourced with, this is from the Australian War Memorial, this is from the so-and-so, so-and-so. So AI, I disagree, Terry, that AI is evil. AI, we can't uninvent it now. I talked about this in the last AMA. It's not being used well mostly at the moment, but it will become a tool that historians will need to certainly accept exists, and probably get to the point where they respect it. And it's if we're the user, you know, we're the consumer should be involved in the process to steer AI to what we want it to be, not necessarily what the creators of AI think it should be. So I think it will become a tool. I think there will be situations where I can, in the future, you know, give PDFs of long reports to AI and say, find me the references to this. And it will flag things and find things. So use it as like an advanced way of finding it. I won't be using it necessarily for opinions. I'll be using it as an aid in my research for finding things quicker, because you know what it's like. You're looking for something, trying to scrolling through a document, looking for references of stuff. You just miss them. You know, it's like when you're looking for your car keys and you've walked past them 3 times before you find them. On AI, if you give it a document and say, can you find this? It theoretically won't miss it. It will go through it in a blink of an eye. So I think there's lots of AI slop out there, as Anthony says. There's lots of stuff. There's lots of reasons to be cautious about it. There's lots of alarming bullshit, emotionally warping stories on Facebook. But I do not want to just dismiss the concept of AI, because I think it will inevitably become part of a toolbox, I suppose. There we are. Norma says, you spin so many plates, I'm in awe. Yeah, but I do let a few of them fall to the ground. So, you know, I'm reasonably good at spinning plates, but there are plates that break. Because I'm not good. So there we are. Let's go through some more questions. Is there a way to make a one-time donation? Absolutely, Susan. Anyone who wants to make a kind of a one-time donation, go to either my D-Day Historian website or my WW2TV website. Contact me there. Send me your email address, and I will tell you there are ways. Basically, PayPal. You can send a one-off thing via PayPal that I can then put into the business to continue funding stuff. Let me go through and find any. Have I met any Victoria Cross or Medal of Honor recipients? I briefly met Johnson Bahari, the Victoria Cross recipient from, was it Iraq or Afghanistan? I think it was Iraq. It was 20 years ago or so. So not a World War II guy. I did meet Walt Ehlers, Medal of Honor recipient with the 1st Division in Normandy, like June 11th or something, won it near Gauville. I met him at the American Cemetery years ago. I feel I met a serving Medal of Honor recipient guy, a Ranger guy or something, briefly a few years ago. There may be others, but they're the ones that I can think of right now. Scott, sorry, question from Scott. I have noticed an increase in the number of World War II books being published in the US. What do you think is the reason for this renewed focus on World War II? I think it's a slightly misleading situation, Scott. Coming from a printing background, which I do, the ability to produce high quality, small run books has increased hugely in the last couple of decades. So I don't know that more World War II books are being sold. I think there are more titles being released that are selling fewer copies. Now, obviously, you have the big names who are selling shed loads, James Holland and John McManus and other, Alex Kershaw, Damian Lewis, those kind of people, Tessa Dunlop, Helen Fry, Claire Mully. Their books are selling in large numbers. I think what we're seeing further down is independent publishers self-publishing, in that it is possible now to produce 100 copies of a book. So it's a double-edged sword, Scott. There are more books coming out, which is good, but I think it's often in shorter print runs. And I read something the other day about the number of books that go into a second printing in history being like 95% don't, but the 5% that do go into multiple print runs. I mean, James Holland's Normandy 44 is on like 25th print run or something. I'm not, this is good. It's good for James, good for us. But a lot of books don't go beyond that first print run. It will take 5 years to sell those copies. And some of you will be very surprised by how few books some of these publishers will produce of a book. It's not uncommon at all for a World War II title in the UK, I'm talking about the UK, to have an initial print run of 300. For a proper book you actually see in shops, and each shop will order 1 or 2 copies, and it might sit there for 3 months before someone buys it. So we're not talking about Robert Lyman. We're not talking about the ones that and the USA, I think, is a slightly different kettle of fish because of the enormity of the country. But I think it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, if that makes sense. I think anybody can now get something published, which is on one hand is good. It also means that there isn't necessarily the peer review process. There isn't necessarily an editing process. There are some people I get sent books that don't end up, or I don't get necessarily the hardback copy. I get a PDF, and it's just unreadable. Some self-published thing. It doesn't mean history is terrible necessarily. It's just unreadable. They've not shown it to anybody. They've not, so it's complicated. I sounded a bit negative there. That is true. The number of new books is that there is more archival information online. I mean, you probably can now legitimately write a fairly good book about World War II without even leaving your house. I'm not necessarily saying you'd write the very best book. You've got to get out there and do the groundwork and visit the battlefields, go to the archives and speak to people. But you could certainly do a passable effort just by using online resources. Certainly if you're writing about a family member. So that wasn't how it was, 20 years ago. You'd have to do in the legwork. So that is that's good. Let me have another sip of beer, and I'll find a couple of questions. Ivan says, I wonder if there's a feedback effect where there's better amateur history online, which in turn gets people interested in more serious material, thus buying books. I see what you mean, and I think the blurring of the line between professional historians, amateur historians, academic historians, popular historians, independent researchers, biographers, it's all the walls of the rules of the walls have broken down, which is both a good thing and also a bad thing. It's like we're not as defined by musical genres these days, are we? You know, back in my day, you were a punk band, or you were a mod band, or you were a hard rock band, or metal band, and I will see a music I don't. I'll see a new. There's a festival in Normandy in July, the Beauregard Festival, and they'll list the artists. And normally, I haven't heard of most of them. Although Pulp are playing this year, or next year, and they'll list the this band, and they'll say this band is a sort of an electric blues, pop, rhythm and blues, rap, hip hop, Turkish funk type, rockabilly, choral, classical group. And I go, what? It's all of them. And I guess it's because that's the kind of the rules now. You can have an album where one track is reggae and one track is that. And I think that sort of happened with World War II history, is that academic history, popular history, the lines are blurred a bit. What is a historian is very open to different interpretations. You know, I'm not a qualified historian. I would not claim I'm a qualified historian, but I think I am an historian in the sense that I have applied a self correcting, rigorous approach to understanding how I perceive the Battle of Normandy, etc., etc. So, you know, all these things have blurred. So let me find some more questions, and just scroll. I can't find any questions. Here's one from Monk. Does Woody collect relics as well? For instance, like James Horn collection of equipment and relics. Yeah, I did. I absolutely did back in the day. In fact, that was really my first step into the military history world. I did a little bit of scale modeling, but I was a collector, then a reenactor, and I owned a couple of military vehicles, one on my own and one with my dad, and I did all that kind of stuff. And I helped organize historical events at places like Kentwell Hall and did some work for English Heritage, etc., etc. And at one point, I had an extensive collection of both original stuff and the stuff I wore, which was a combination of original stuff and replica stuff. And then after my last living history stroke reenactment event was Arnhem 2004, so nearly 22 years ago. I was, 35 years old, and I was fatter than I am these days. And I felt, okay, I'm going to stop it now. I'm getting too old. Let the younger people do it. And it was changing. The hobby was changing. And I could basically have kind of kept some of the original stuff, sold on the replica stuff, kept some just in my cupboard in case I wanted to dive into it again. But that was not the way my brain worked. And I just basically, I knew a French guy, Sébastien Lemonnier, his name is, still around as a reenactor. And I said, look, I'm getting rid of my stuff. And he said, what? I said, all of it. I want all of it to go. You know, the battle dresses, the Denison smocks, the webbing, the helmets, the badges, the small personal items, the whole lot. But you've got to take everything. You've got to take the camp beds and the great coats and the spare large packs and small packs and kit bags. And he came, and so it was 20 years ago. And he came and bought the whole lot. And I got good money for it at the time. It would have been worth a lot more now, some of it. But at the time, I was happy with it. And I put that money into books for what was then my burgeoning World War II battlefield career. And I kept I've got one little display case of odd bits and pieces. So I've got little vials of sand from Iwo Jima that Marty Morgan, I think, got me that. I've got bits of shrapnel I picked up here and there. I've got a few bits and pieces like that. I've got family badges, family medals, a couple of things given to me by veterans, but basically the whole lot in my display cabinet could fit in a shoebox, basically. Certainly 2 shoeboxes. So I don't have it, and I don't miss it at all. I live in Normandy. I can go and get my fill of militaria whenever I want. I can walk to a museum and see as many battle dresses and helmets and vehicles as I want. I drive past a Churchill tank and a Sherman tank and a tank destroyer every time I go shopping. So I don't miss it at all. But I used to collect, and it was that background of being a reenactor coming from the collecting world, is that when Phil Blood came on and talked about his great uncle as a Chindit, And there was this is a show we did back in, it was on June the 6th. It was good because it was the anniversary of when Phil Blood's uncle received his military medal. And there was a great photo of his uncle. And, Phil is a proper historian. He's Dr. Philip Blood. He is a proper academic historian, and he knows a shit ton about the war. We had a great chat, Zoom chat. He, I, and Gary Best, our friend from Northern Ireland, on the 29th or 28th, whatever it was, a couple of days ago. But on this World War II TV show, there was a great photo of his great uncle in battle dress, and I was able to tell things to Phil about the photo that was his best BD, his best walking out, press back the collar and bleach the collar, because that's my knowledge of battle dress. And there's people who know a lot more about battle dress than I do. Taff Gillingham is a mate of mine for years who knows more about uniforms than I've, most of us have ever, forgotten. He's incredible stuff. I've forgotten more than we know. That's what I mean by that. But I can hold my own in those conversations. So that grounding of growing up near the 8th Air Force's bases, so I knew my way around the 8th Air Force airfield. I knew my way around uniforms, equipment, vehicles, tanks, was really kind of the foundational start. And then came to Normandy, and I've been coming to Normandy for years. And then my basis of learning how to tour the battlefields, that's kind of my my special set of skills that are then built on, and it's interesting. This is going off on a tangent. That the new crop of tour guides in Normandy, who are very good, by the way, have often had formal training in guiding, and therefore a good kind of broad sweep of history. They would know French and European history from sort of Roman era up to today, and they're very good at what they do. But they've come at the profession from a completely different direction that I came from. So, I've had conversations with French guides about, the British regimental system, and not just the regimental system, but like the nicknames that soldiers would have, slang names for other regiments. So I mentioned the veteran of the Royal Army Service Corps later on. So Royal Army Service Corps, RASC, kind of universally known to everybody else as Runaway Someone's Coming. The Long Range Desert Group, a cousin of mine who was in the 8th Army in North Africa referred to them as the Long Range Dancing Girls. That was his joke name, the Long Range Desert Group. So that kind of stuff isn't necessarily in books. That's what I call sort of pub knowledge. And there was a time, I'm going off on a real tangent now. I hope this isn't too boring for you. Me, Colin, Matt, another guy in Normandy, Brit, and Thierry, my brother-in-law, Mag's brother, we were going to be coming back on the night ferry from Portsmouth to Ouistreham, and we went to a pub in Portsmouth that we frequent because they got decent, fairly decent food and a nice range of ales. And long story short, we won the pub quiz. There was a pub quiz when we were there, and we won it. And we didn't even start at the beginning. We arrived, they were already on like round 3 or something. And they said, do you want to join the pub quiz? It started, you've missed a couple of rounds, but you can start. We went, all right. And we caught up and overtook and won. And what was interesting is the barmaid, who was like 17 or something, or probably older than that, said, how do you know that stuff? And Colin said, well, we know this. We're old. We know shit. He said, we just know shit. And I've got to a point in my life where I kind of just know shit. I don't know everything. There's lots of things I don't know about, but I can kind of hold my own on equipment in World War II and webbing and weapons. I've shot a few weapons. I've carried weapons. I've done a bit of marching. I've done a bit of this, that, and the other. So that's kind of my foundational understanding of history that has enabled me to get to where I am, whatever I am now. Here's a comment about Dieppe that I would push back against. I will push back against that. I do not accept. I challenge the idea that Dieppe is on the progression to D-Day timeline. I'm not saying it doesn't influence in some ways the thinking about Normandy, because I think it absolutely has some impact. But Dieppe, to me, is on the special assault commando mission, raids timeline. and I've said this to Normandy guides when they say, "Oh, it's Dieppe that is the big learning curve for Normandy." And I go, with all due respect, that is a Normandy perspective, because Dieppe technically is kind of part of Normandy. It's actually part of Picardy, I think, but it's sort of part of the same coast. It's a couple of hours up the road. And I go, no, Husky, Torch and Husky are way more important. Are way more important on the learning curve, because Dieppe, even if Dieppe had worked, was not about establishing a long-term foothold as a basis for an invasion of Europe. It was only ever going to be a hit-and-run raid that didn't work. And so therefore, it had completely different criteria in terms of what would have made it successful than establishing a permanent attack, a permanent beachhead in Normandy. And it's why, as you've heard me say many times before, D-Day is just the chapter one of a long campaign. And so if there are parallels when you compare June the 6th with Dieppe, that first few hours, but the comparisons then fall apart when you're looking at the build-up, when you're looking at the building of airfields, the bringing across of supply. So I see what you're saying, but I don't think Dieppe is really, it's way further down the list of influence on the success of Normandy than people think it is, or Overlord than people think it is. I think you've got to put Torch and Husky way up there. You've even got to put some of the landings in the Pacific there ahead of it. Here's one from World War II historian 1945. Have I dealt with many World War II phonies during tours or anniversaries? Yeah, I have. Not many, but yeah, I have. It's enough of a problem for me to have distinct memories of it without it ever being like an epidemic. The great majority of veterans I met were who they said they were and did what they said they did. But there were a few exceptions. And I will share one. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to air this. So, and as always, I've very much appreciated the fact that some of you have said in the sidebar that you consider me kind of humble and self-deprecating and unassuming, and I've got an ego. I can show off with the best of them, but I do definitely try and keep one level of kind of humility and not putting. It's about the channel. It's about the guests. It's not about me. So, over the years, I'd met various 2nd Battalion US Ranger veterans who had scaled the cliffs at Point Hook. I met Len Lamel a couple of times. I never met, but I corresponded with George Kirchner, who received the Distinguished Service Cross. I corresponded via email, in fact, with Frank South, who was a medic there. Who else was there? I spoke to Ranger veterans. There's 2 or 3 others. And then, of course, one by one, they died. And then from whichever anniversary it was, a new one appeared. An officer, George Klein, his name was. And the story George told, which began in the truth and then went elsewhere, was that he had been selected as initial potential ranger and had trained with Rudder and the Rangers, blah, 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 blah. Then had an injury in training, and then spent a few weeks away, and then came back and joined the Rangers just in time for D-Day. So the first bit is true. He did get selected for Rangers. He did do the training with Rudder. He did hurt himself, but he never returned to the Rangers. This guy, in fact, ended up in I was going to say not the 90th Division, 79th Division. Anyway, he was an artillery officer. He had a distinguished career in the ETO. But he came back and, was there at Point du Hoc, was there talking about Point du Hoc. And I had the opportunity to meet him on June the 6th, whichever year it was. It was one of the big anniversaries, so it might have been 2014. I feel it was 2014. If someone will correct me if I'm wrong. I had the opportunity to meet him for an evening or lunch up at the Roosevelt Cafe up in Utah Beach, and it was for a World War II Foundation event, and I was allowed to sit at George Klein's table, and they said the organizer said, "Oh, so you can chat to him about what you want to chat to him about." So I had lunch with him, and I knew I was gonna have this opportunity. So I had a couple of questions ready to ask him, and I think I had three, and two of which I remember, and one of which I don't. And one was, at what point were you as an officer? Because everyone I'd met in person had been an other rank. I had corresponded with George Kirch, who'd been lieutenant, but I had not asked him about his command role because it was years earlier. And I said, at what point were you told about the updated intelligence about the 155mm guns at Pointe du Hoc, the fact they may not have been at the site and they may have been pulled back to hedgerow? And he said, we had a briefing for officers, whatever it was, 72 hours before D-Day, and I'm scribbling down, this is really interesting stuff. And then the next question I asked him was the one I'd forgotten. And the third question was, were you there on the ship when Colonel Rudder came in and said he'd relieved Captain Lytell, or Major Lytell of command? If you don't know this story, read one of the great books about the Stephen Zaloga's book on Pointe du Hoc covers it. So Major Lytell had the heebie-jeebies on the boat going over, and was starting to wander around the decks of the ship, saying, we're all going to die, it's a suicide mission, blah, blah, blah. And I'm simplifying this story and for brevity. Basically, relieved the guy of his command. And this guy went on to have an incredibly cool career with the 90th Division. No, I think he received the Silver Star twice, or the Silver Star once, 2 Bronze Stars, something like that, with the 90th Division. Incredibly gallant, obviously, just had a moment of personal weakness. And Rudder himself decided to lead the battalion in on June the 6th. And I asked George Klein, were you there? And George Klein told me how Rudder came into the wardroom on the ship, and he explained where everybody was sitting around the table. There I was there, so-and-so was there, so-and-so was there. Rudder came in, he said, and he took his helmet off, put his helmet on the table. And I'm sitting like jaw open to writing all this stuff down. Not necessarily taking it as being absolute gospel, but there's someone who was there who is telling me his version. This has got to be something that I will consider and add to my repertoire of information for potential presentations in Pointe du Hoc. So he answered all my questions, but with incredible detail. So that evening, I drove. This was an event at Utah Beach, and I was living in. Was I living in Bahia by then? Doesn't matter the story. I'm pretty much driving back to Bahia without any of my wheels of the van touching the road. I was kind of bouncing on just excitement of having spent time with a ranger officer, and him specifically being able to answer my questions I'd had for some time about the Battle of Pointe du Hoc on D-Day. As I get into my house and I put the computer on, there were messages waiting for me. I don't know whether I hadn't checked them on my phone. Maybe I didn't have my phone. It doesn't matter. And my world came crashing around because there are messages waiting for me saying, have you met George Klein? Have you heard anything about George Klein's story? We think he's a Walter Mitty. And one of the people contacting me was Marty Morgan, who you've seen on the channel. One was Alex Kershaw. And I'm like, shit, yeah, I've just been with him. And I say, well, we're just checking it out. We don't think he was there. And we now know he wasn't there. And I'm like, but he just, but he just told me. And it was Marty. And this is where, this is why it was a lesson for me. Marty said, think about it, decompress. We're not talking. Actually, I think we did speak on telephone, and then we're doing messages on Messenger. And he said, think about the discussion you had. Think about how you spoke to him. Think about what his responses were. And I'm going, well, he was giving me all the information about it. And I went, oh, yeah, that's it. And I suddenly realized his answers were too good. They were too good. In that those of you who are watching this who've interviewed any kind of veteran, or indeed anybody about anything in their past, maybe you've sat your own mum down and asked her about her school days, and you go, who was your maths teacher? She goes, your mum goes, I don't know. I remember my English teacher was called Mr. Brown, And the thing is, we all have gaps in our knowledge. There's bits about my school days I remember like It was yes. The other bits I've completely forgotten. School friends I've completely forgotten. Our memory isn't like a videotape recording of something where it's like bits and pieces. And what happened is George Klein had read extensively about Pointe du Hoc, took on board his own experience of he did know Colonel Rudder in the early, he did know some of these guys, and had basically constructed a version of this that was too good. And it was faultless. And therefore it was suspicious. And I'm still a bit annoyed with George Klein because I handed him my copy of Robert Black's book, The Battalion, about 2nd Battalion Rangers at Pointe du Hoc, that I'd had signed by several Pointe du Hoc veterans. James Hudnall is the other guy I corresponded with. I think and Lamell had signed it. I think I'd had like 4 other Ranger signatures. And I handed it to George Klein. I said, George, would you do me the honor of signing your book there? And when he took that book from my hand, he knew he wasn't a Ranger at Pointe du Hoc, right? He knew he wasn't that. And when he was unmasked, the tragedy was the poor guy ended up being kind of put on suicide watch because he was so upset. I mean, it was his own fault. It was his own making that he'd been found out, and the tree that had been planted in his name got, ceremonially cut down and blah, blah, blah. But he signed his book and gave it back to me, knowing that he didn't deserve to be on that same page. So I've now got a book signed. Do I fix it out? Try and put a label over it? But what the fuck? There's just one of those things. Let's do a question. With some areas of military history, there is an air of gatekeeping, usually around assessment of leaders. In your opinion, is that the case for World War II? Is it becoming that way, or will it ever be? I think it has been that way, and I think we're on the brink of it changing and not being that way, because I am inherently a glasses half full person. Let me have a sip of beer and I'll expand. That was more than a sip. A little bit more. There's a little bit more left. So, I don't know that gatekeeping is necessarily the word I would use, but there's a whole lot of people, and I include myself in this sometimes, who, and you'll all go, yeah, that's me, who grew up with the war movie pattern, the Battle of Britain, the earlier books, the Carlo D'Estes, the Stephen Ambrose, the so-and-so and so forth. And we formulated, like, I'm not going to get into religion and beliefs and stuff like that, but you're most accepting of ideas when you're young. So, if you're young and you're told to believe something, like Father Christmas, whatever it would be, that's when you're susceptible. And I think we're all guilty to some extent of when we first watched war movies and we first read stuff, and whatever we were told about whoever it was we read about, those first opinions kind of just took root. And if you're an American, it's generally that Montgomery was a prick. If you're a Brit, Douglas Bader helped win the Battle of Britain, those kind of things, And what's happening is that my lights just went off for some reason. I don't know why my lights went off. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Let me just try and get my lights come back in again. I don't know why that's happened. I've gone in the dark, haven't I? Doesn't really matter. I don't know why they've come undone. Let me see if I can get them to come back on again. Very weird. My microphone's still working. You can still hear me okay? I can't get my lights to work. Doesn't matter. It's like we've got internet as the evening's gone on. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily use the word gatekeeping, but these opinions are deeply rooted, and I think they just don't get they don't get challenged enough. So what's happening though, and I've mentioned this on the channel, is that people like, you know, John Buckley and John McManus, who teach World War II, they are having people come to their classes now who don't have those preconceived ideas about Montgomery or MacArthur or whoever it would be, and that's very healthy. So I think it will get better. I think people will come to view World War II without that collective peer preconceived ideas. So I hope that we're on the brink of a new era. The area where the gatekeeping is a problem, absolutely is a problem. And you've heard me talk about this before, and it can never be talked about enough, as far as I'm concerned, is with women in World War II history. And it's getting better. I'm not saying it's not getting better, because it is absolutely getting better. But there's still a lot of people who just don't seem to want to have their World War II history given to them by people with tits, if I'm being blunt, and especially if they're young. And that absolutely grinds my gears. I absolutely do not understand why anybody would have such preconceived. I see it happening. I see it in real time. Sometimes when a woman guest is on, especially if they're younger, and I see the way people's tone is, and they're not normally the regular. They're not you guys. They're the ones who've come on, and they're like, "Well, we shall see what this woman has to say about this." And I can't see them, but I know they're sitting there with their arms folded, and they're just waiting for her to slip up, and they're just waiting for her to just say the 18th squadron when she means the 80th squadron, whatever it would be, you know. And God, that gets on my nerves. God, that gets on my nerves. And I just don't know where it comes from. I do not know why anyone would have that attitude. It totally baffles me. I mean, I just don't understand it. I do not understand it at all. And if anyone can enlighten me as to why, oh, my lights are just working again, as to why, if you're one of those people who's watching this, who is naturally inclined to assume a woman doesn't know their subject as well as a man, can you explain why? What is it? What is now? There are probably bad women historians as there are bad male historians. What naturally is it about a woman historian that makes you think that they won't know their subject? Because I think, you know, I have no idea. Anyway, let me go and find a couple of questions, because I don't want to get on too ranty. Because there were lots. I wasn't scrolling through, and let me find some questions, and then Rasmus Litgard. You might have thought about this at some point. Niels Henkerman. Yeah. I've got the two first volumes of his series. Brilliant. And Niels has been on talking about it. And Niels is a friend of mine, and we spent time together in Normandy over the years. And I love Niels. And Niels is a very good example of the type of book. He fits in that category of, he probably, or maybe not probably, he might not have got his book published 30 years ago if he was writing 30 years ago, because it's fairly niche. It's fairly, you know, it's Organisation of German Divisions in Normandy. But he would get it published now because print runs can be smaller and what have you. Just as difficult to write. He's absolutely more deserving of a far wider readership than he's getting. Niels is very what's the word about it? Understanding about it. And from Niels's point of view, if his work is then used by authors in future books about Normandy, even if they don't, it'd be nice if they name check him and give him a credit. But even if some of his writing about how the Germans fought and how they were organized, just some of the things, some of the myths he challenges are, the foot battalions, the stomach battalions, all the Germans are old men or young kids, that kind of stuff. The generic stuff that was said by people like Cornelius Ryan all those years ago. If just some of his stuff starts taking root and people start writing, incorporating some of his thinking, he will be very happy and very proud. But his writing should be his book should be better known. Let me find more questions. So Anne is saying she got to meet the nephew of Ed Shames. Yeah, I knew Ed. I knew Ed very well. Ed was one of those veterans who, it's fair to say, some people liked him and some people didn't like him. He was a very interesting human being who could be frustratingly blunt and incredibly forceful personality. And I've had some incredible moments with him, but incredibly frustrating. I mean, a force of nature was Ed James. There we are. Let me go through and find some questions. And I've just started my other beer, which is a French one, the Le Quai des Brunes. It's got a picture of a dock there on it. Le Quai des Brunes, so a boat coming ashore. So it's a brown beer. I've never had that before. Oh, it's sort of like a porter. That's all right. Quite nice. That's very nice. Yeah. Let me find some questions. This bit where I'm trying to find a question. This is what I could do with an assistant to kind of find some questions for me. Observation from Milbar. Dieppe was very important for the air superiority campaign against Normandy. Yes. Now that I do agree with. It was. Yeah, that's. But I would argue. Well, yes, you're right. I would also say it's sort of to do with the air power being deployed over Europe generally. Yes, no, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Absolutely. Woody question, and the light-hearted one. If you had become famous with your punk band, would you have still been interested in World War II? Probably, yeah. I mean, when I say, I kind of was in a band-ish. I had a van for a while, so I could transport the van. So I was like the spare drummer. I wasn't very good at drums, but not that you needed to be in a punk band back then. So I was in a band. We kind of buggered about a bit on the circuit, kind of pub circuit a bit. And our band was called I Fucked Your Mother. We were like 18. And it's a random rabbit trail now. I remember the discussion we had in a pub about what we're going to call ourselves. All sorts of names came out. And I remember we got down to the point where should it be I fucked your mum or I fucked your mum? This is when I'm going to get demonetized by YouTube. But anyway, that was the name of our band. We weren't very good. None of our recording. I think we recorded some stuff on like one of those little flat cassette deck things. And my mate Dan, if anyone's got who I haven't spoken to in nearly 40 years, would have the cassettes if he had the cassettes. I would have Gary Giamara is someone I would definitely have on because he's done lots of stuff about the kind of pre-Normandy stuff. I'm going backwards up through scrolling through the subject, so I'm finding things out of order. Gary's always welcome to come on. I think we discussed it, and I think he said he wasn't interested in coming on. Yeah. People are rattled by the fact that was the name of my punk band. Yeah. What's interesting, Gary, is that it seems that a lot of people who are interested in military history do have like another like string to their bow. I mean, Al Murray, if he's a stand-up comedian, he's a historian, and he plays in a band. I think a lot of people have another kind of string to their bow. I think, what clearly is the case is that there's a lot of people of my age group who despite the things they got into, one of the things they were into was definitely World War II. And it's because it was just part of what we were exposed to. If you were my age group and you grew up in the 70s, you know, the comics were about World War II. There was a war movie on a Saturday afternoon. There was a war movie every afternoon on Channel 4, you know, and we all knew veterans, you know, our granddads, our great uncles, our grandmothers, all there. So, you know, I think there was a lot of people who World War II was part of their lives, and to some extent has always been part of their lives. People who, it doesn't necessarily mean they read books, but they will always, there's that sort of, I sit in all the overlaps of the Venn diagram. I'm in the war movies fan. I'll watch Where He Was There and Zulu and Wild Geese and all those things. I did a bit of scale modeling. I did a bit of reenacting. I've go to air shows, went to military vehicle shows. I would all that. I would go battlefield touring. So I sit in the Venn diagram of all those things there. But there are some people who reenact but don't read books, or people who go to air shows but don't read about World War II, or they make scale models, but they do World War II alongside models of Grand Prix cars. So I just ended up having all of those things there, which is just who I was. What's my favorite cheese? I'm not a big cheese eater. I like cheese. It has an ingredient. So raclette, which is the French like fondue, where you have melted cheese. That'd be like an Emmental or Gruyere or raclette cheese or Swiss cheese, and you melt it over charcuterie and potatoes. That I like that. Obviously, I like anything like, you know, cheese in lasagnas and cheese in macaroni and that kind of stuff. And I like a bit of brie every now and then, a bit of camembert, but I'm not a blue cheese guy. I'm not a goat cheese guy. I'm not a kind of stinky cheese person, you know, really. In my French family, I just skip the cheese course and I wait for dessert. A lot of my French family will skip the dessert course but have cheese. To me, that's no. There's, because I have my human stomach. You know, cows have multiple stomachs. I have a dessert department. I'm sure you do as well. It doesn't matter how much I've had of starters and main courses and peanuts before a meal. It doesn't matter how full that gets, and it gets very full. My dessert department is an entirely separate part of my stomach. I'm sure you agree. There's always room for cheesecake. There's always room for a bit of rice, but there's always room for a little bit of ice cream. So I will skip cheese course and go straight to dessert myself. I've been here for a long time, but I'm not a big cheese lover. I just did, you know what, you know, no cheese, shocking things. I don't stand out with placards going ban cheese. It's just not something I do. I'm not really a wine person. I'll occasionally have a glass of white wine. I mean, tonight, Mag's away tonight, so I'm loose here to talk to you guys. That's why I scheduled this, because Mag's away with some friends who I would be there. I'm invited, but we've got the kitten, and we can't be away for a night from the kitten yet. So I'm relegated to house duty, which is why I'm talking to you. You know, I was talking about cheese, wasn't I? I forgot where I was with cheese. I completely lost my train of thought there. Bloody hell! I don't stand against it. It's just not something that really particularly appeals to me as a thing. Mag, for example, doesn't really do chocolate and desserts. So, you know, whatever. Oh yeah, I was talking about wine, wasn't I? So yeah, I was going to say we've got a bottle of champagne for tomorrow, and I will have a glass of champagne for New Year's Eve. Of course I will. But if I'm honest, for what you're paying for champagne, it's not that I'm a tightwad. I'm not a tight ass. I'd rather have a decent beer than a champagne, or I'd rather have, you know, a better, you know, but you got to do champagne. So there we are. Gary, any regret? I seem to be picking on your questions. I don't know why they seem to be coming up there. I'll go and find some more questions, and at some point I will have to go, because I will need to go for a wee at some point, because my bladder is not what it was. Any regret just to no longer living in the UK? No. No. I miss banter. I miss one of the things I miss. The biggest thing I miss about my best mate Colin is the fact that when we met at the pub, we could talk about everything. Everything we connected. Our childhoods were similar. We were 7 years apart, but basically at our age doesn't make any difference. We could talk about, playground trends when we were kids. We could talk about football back in the 70s and Emlyn Hughes and Joe Jordan and Lou Macari and all those kind of things there. We could talk about our love of the same kind of books, movies, music. We shared interest in music and that kind of just bantery way. And when I get back to the UK, I find myself doing banter with people who don't necessarily want it, just some poor innocent person at a checkout. I'm going to buy a Toblerone or something, or Mars bar, a Crunchy, and I'll make some awful kind of dad joke thing. And the thing about my French isn't as good as it could be, even after all these years. And it took a bit of a backward step when I started doing this for a living, because I'm just not going out there and using French as often as I used to. When I was out touring, I'd be speaking to people in cafes and restaurants. It's like any other. It's like a muscle. If you're not using it as much, you just and because a lot of the people I meet who are friends or tour guides, we end up speaking English because they like to hear me. Long story short, so when I'm with my French friends, even if my French was academically perfect, and it isn't, it still wouldn't have that level of banter. It's still what Phil Blood's in Germany. If you're a Brit living in Australia or an Australian living in America, if it's the same language, you can do banter. But Mag's English is fantastic, but there's that lack of understanding of tone and sarcasm. Me and Colin would say something to each other, and Mag would hear it and miss the tone, as most of our French friends. They missed the fact that it was meant something that sounded nasty was meant affectionately, or something that sounded nice was meant nasty. That tone of voice that you have, and that kind of crack stuff. Mag and I communicate in English, except when I'm trying to be romantic when I was speaking French, and when I'm in trouble, Mag uses French with me. So we pretty much live in French. Very few people are culturally and humor-wise bilingual. Humor is very, very, and humor is not just language-based, it's generationally based as well. And that's why me and Colin got on so well as well, because, even with British people who are 30 years younger than me, you just make jokes that the tone doesn't work and that kind of stuff. So banter is something I really miss. And the other thing about if I get old, I will get old. I am getting old. Is that some people say that if you have second languages, and I kind of have a second language to a certain level, that's good for your brain. And some studies show that multilingual people are less susceptible to things like Alzheimer's and dementia, which makes sense. The other thing is that the other point of view is that sometimes your second language could be the first thing to go when you get elderly. So if I ended up finding myself on my own in France in my 80s, in the back of my mind is this fear that I won't be able to communicate, that I will lose my French completely, and I'll just be and I'll be losing English as well, and I'll be stuck in some. So maybe that's the only thing. That's a bit negative way of looking at it. That's the only thing I think I miss about England. I mean, obviously, any Brit living abroad will say they miss fish and chips, and all that's true. Fish and Brit chips, good curry, that kind of stuff there. But you know what? France is by no means perfect. There's lots of things going on with French economy and things like that, and France has lots of the same issues that UK has and USA has, and blah 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 blah. But I love France. I love France's attitude to family. I love France's general sort of acceptance of different ages and different peoples and culturally. And so, you know, there we are. Let me try and find another couple of questions. I know some of you probably fired lots of questions to me later on, but earlier on, I now can't find them. Why Bruce is asking, why were the hordes of minesweepers off the D-Day beaters on June the 5th not fired on by the German guns that they were well in range of? Well, I don't think they were. I mean, I don't think the minesweepers were really there till much later on the 5th, or they were out of range, and then the weather didn't help. The fact there was storms in the Channel. The 5th was awful. 5th was still terrible weather. There's a bit of naval action off Cherbourg, but I mean, basically that they weren't seen. I mean, I'm simplifying things a lot here, but essentially, the Allies had full tactical surprise on the morning of June the 6th. The first moment the Germans were if the Germans had detected properly a force of minesweepers and stuff off that they didn't detect them. They didn't fire because they didn't detect them. Or if they did, they dismissed it as being something that it wasn't. So that's that one answered. Let me find another question. And finally a question worthy of my intellect and my analytical rigor, from Willie Robertson, who attends as many World War II TV shows as I do. He might even have done more than me. He and Nikki are there for every bloody one. Sometimes I think you two need to get a fucking life. So my cat, I thought, no, that's KO has gone and fucked off again. A Jammy Dodger clearly is a superior biscuit, because I don't think that custard creams have as much cream in them as they used to. Now, that the experts may say they are exactly the same, but I feel that when I have a custard cream these days, it feels drier. It feels more like a normal biscuit than the joyous, creamy, filled thing it was when I was a kid. Now, that may just be me looking back at it with a fondness that wasn't there, but I still get, with a Jammy Dodger and the various different incarnations of jammy filled biscuit items, because Jammy Dodger is but one of several types. There's sort of circular one with jam in it. Then there's kind of I still get that kind of excitement of the jamminess with a Jammy Dodger, more so than a custard cream. So what I do is, if I depending on what brand of custard cream I can get, because I find that people who have no idea what I'm talking about now, like, what the fuck is he talking about? We're talking about biscuits, the English British definition of biscuit, not biscuits like biscuits and gravy that you people the other side of the Atlantic. We're talking about sweet biscuits you have with a cup of tea, or you have for the afternoon tea, blah blah blah. So when I have a custard cream, what I do is I try and kind of pull off one part of a custard cream, the top of a custard cream, and then eat that separately. Then take another custard cream and try and pull the top off. And then I make a new super improved custard cream by taking two halves of custard cream, each with the cream in them, and restack to make a super duper double filled custard cream. It means you're still only eating the same amount of biscuit and cream, but you have the plain ones first, and you have the double. I do the same with Oreos as well. I try and double stack an Oreo, but you can now buy the double filled Oreos, which defeats the object. So you can make a quadruple filled Oreos. Yeah. This is the point of the day where, if Mag was here, she would switch on now and go, "Yeah, you've loosened up a bit now. The beer has loosened you up." Yeah, it has. Yeah, the beer has definitely loosened up. But I will need to I need to go for a wee at some point. Let me find another question, and then I'll leave things there. You're also good chatting to each other. So someone who we had a vote for Barry says custard cream all the way. So custard cream over a jammy Dodger. Oh. Yeah, well, I respect your opinion there. You're wrong, but there you go. Wagon wheels are no longer the same. Now they use a chocolate flavored covering compared to the chocolate it was. That's happening a lot now with regulations about how much cocoa content. And penguins are no longer a chocolate biscuit. They are a biscuit with chocolate flavor, which is disgusting. David says the only reason I watch WW2TV is to learn British English cultural touchstones and slang. Salute. There you are. Is that when you want that to say what I do? Is that you're referring to double stacking custard creams? Yeah. See, no, you see what we call biscuits, but we have cookies as well. Cookies are in my universe. Cookies are a separate thing. They are another thing. So there are. Let's go through this. So cookies are always round. By my definition, they have to be something in them. They have to be either raisins or chocolate chip or something. They are a particular size. They're bigger than the bottom of a bottle. They're the size of like old fashioned milk bottle. They're like what, 2.5, 3 inches across. That's a cookie, and they're usually in America. I consider them very much an American thing. Now crackers. That's for having the cheese. That is a savory thing. So that's some sort of Ritz cracker or cream crackers. Rivita, I think, would come under that kind of category. That's for something having with cottage cheese or cream cheese, or you can have jam if you want. You can have jam, but that's mostly a savory thing. Biscuits are a sweet thing. They don't have to be very sweet. A hobnob isn't terribly sweet. Shortbread. And the clue is in the name. Bread is a different thing again. That's some kind of it's not really a bread, but it's not a biscuit. I will stop because it's getting completely bonkers now. But there you are. I'm not going too much now onto that. Robert saying, did the Germans know there was a code word overlord? Probably not. I don't think the Germans had any access to any of our understanding about what our code words were. They aren't, where we're listening to all their stuff. No, they're not basically listening to anything we say. Ian agrees with my wagon wheels assessment. There we are. Thank you. That's good. Do we have fried Mars bars in France? No, I wouldn't try them. I had one in it wasn't in Scotland. It was somewhere like Leeds or somewhere York. I wasn't a big fan, if I'm being honest. We ought to have some kind of World War II question. On a more World War II matter, are there any studies comparing assaults and emplacements with Avery's crocodiles and bow systems among the attacking force? I mean, yes. But not necessarily comparing one type of thing against another type of thing. So Dermot Rooney was on a year or so ago looking at the reports he has about the use of Churchill crocodiles, particularly with their use and their effectiveness psychologically. But so like the Royal Engineers would maybe look at what they did with their Averys against stuff, but wouldn't have the data about an armored regiment using conventional HE or AP or something against targets. So not much study has been done then or now, I think, comparing the merits of different systems in that, the RAF didn't necessarily look at how artillery was knocking out targets on the ground any more than artillery users would look at what the RAF are using. They would all look at their own sets of results. So, yeah. How do we get off World War II into food? You see, I'm going to go into a bit of trivia now about World War II that includes food, and you can like this or not like it. I don't really care. So I'm going to really be simple on this. So don't start going, you're not quite right. I'm doing it in a simple way after a couple of beers because it's December the 30th. So Harry Truman becomes president after FDR's death, and he is there, of course, ultimately overseeing all the things like, to some extent, the GI Bill, returning USA, the repatriation of the dead of World War II, all that kind of stuff there. And I'm simplifying this. Essentially, what he wants to do is make sure that returning Americans get service men and women, get the creature comforts they had been not getting when they're overseas. So we're not saying that they're experiencing the war better or worse. Now, he's looking at it from a USA point of view, okay? So he makes sure that when Jim gets back to Nashville, Jim has access to Coca-Cola and records and beer and all that kind of stuff. So during World War II, in the UK, chocolate was one of the most regulated products of the Ministry of Food because they absolutely didn't want to get a sense of kind of competition because there are different brands of chocolate. So I'm simplifying this. I got all the information from the National Army Museum and I went into information. This is years and years ago, and I used to do some lecturing on this. So basically, people in World War II didn't necessarily have a particular brand of bacon they wanted, for example, right? It was just meat was either available or not available. This is before the sausages were branded as such. It was like the butchers would do a sausage, but chocolate always was branded. There was Mars bars, there was Bounties, there was Bourneville and Cadbury's and stuff. So it had to be regulated. What they didn't want is people trying to travel because Leeds had Mars bars, but Harrogate didn't, or that Doncaster had access to, I don't think wagon wheels were around then. So it was the Ministry of Food trying to distribute chocolate in such a way. I mean, there was a proper chocolate department so that chocolate was whatever chocolate was available to the British public, it was organized in such a way that they didn't want people kind of going, oh, but I can't get Kit Kats anymore. There was planning behind it. Okay, right. So, Truman, all cocoa beans then pretty much came from South America, right? And obviously during the war, less cocoa beans had been coming to the UK directly because of the Battle of the Atlantic, blah, blah, blah. But we were still getting cocoa beans from Canada. There was pre-war supplies, stocks, things like that. So chocolate never ran out in World War II, as far as I know. They had to regulate it. And like everything else, it was rationed. You couldn't just go and buy 6 Mars bars. It was on a ration. But it was, and there were chocolate items available in rations and for the soldiers. But so chocolate never ran out. Well, I am going somewhere with this story, by the way. I will get to my fucking point finally, okay? So basically, when under Truman's presidency, he doesn't let any cocoa solids, it's not him directly, but it kind of is, go to the UK. So, no, we're keeping all of ourselves. And in the immediate, I think this began even before the war was over, basically the UK, suddenly their supply of cocoa beans basically runs out. But the British veterans are coming back from the war as well, and they want their chocolate. So what happens, and it particularly starts in 1945, but it ramps up over the next decade or so, is that as the war ends, milk is now being not sent. So dairy production is up because we've done shows in the Women's Land Army. We've done there's more crops being produced. There's more the lumber industry is working quite well in the UK. There's more fields being done. There's more all that kind of stuff. Where horses have gone for the war effort, cows have blah blah blah. There's plenty of dairy stuff in the UK, but we're now not getting cocoa beans. So for about 10 years after 1945, the British chocolate manufacturers have to increase the amount of milk in their chocolate products and decrease the amount of cocoa. So before the war, the majority of chocolate the UK ate was dark chocolate. Mars bars were dark chocolate. Bounties were dark chocolate. Bourneville was dark chocolate. There was some dairy milk, but the British taste was for dark chocolate. As the war ends, the chocolate manufacturers have to, as I say, add more and more milk to the chocolate. So what happens is a generation of kids grow up on much milkier chocolate. My dad, who was born in 1945, so he would have been when rationing comes off and rationing starts coming to an end in the mid-50s in the UK. And my dad remembers this very specifically in 1957 for his birthday on August the 15th, VJ Day. He was 12 years old, the anniversary of VJ Day. He had his first chocolate bar just for him. And it was something you treated as an absolute luxury item. He would like sit it in his bedroom like a award he won at school on his shelf and treasure it for like a few days before opening it. And or maybe he'd have one bit a day every day for a week because you don't know when you're going to get your next chocolate. So our tastes in the UK went for milky chocolate. And that's what my dad had as a kid, milky chocolate. And my mum had milky chocolate. And then when they brought me and my sister up, we were given milky chocolate. And it's taken 8 decades for the tastes of the UK to begin to shift back to darker chocolate. But basically what I'm telling you folks is that the chocolate the UK ate before the war was mostly dark chocolate. And then after the war, it has to go back to milky chocolate, but it's all because of Harry Truman. It's Harry Truman's fault that a generation of British kids grew up eating milky chocolate rather than dark chocolate. There you are. That is my history chocolate lesson for today. So there we are. I'm gonna cut it to an end soon because I think we've going around in circles now. And I found some chocolate now. I think I've got a crunchie left I got for Christmas. I know one crunchy left. So there we are. I think I will leave things there. So basically one of the departments of the Ministry of Food was a chocolate department. It was considered a high morale product. And there was all sorts of regulations about shipping chocolate, and they didn't want like an underground, black market chocolate thing because there was black market for like sausages, but there wasn't much of a black. You can't just make chocolate in your back garden. It's not a product that you can really. You've got to get access to cocoa beans, whereas you could probably get sausages in the black market. Chocolate was highly regulated. Anyway, there you are. That's I'm gonna leave things as that. So I didn't answer half of your questions, and I didn't talk about my favorite shows of the year as such because we went into other conversations, which was interesting, but I never quite know how these things are going to go, and it went the way it went, and there we are. And that, just very quickly, that subject about, there's a meme, isn't there, that the British still approach food like they're on rationing, and it's one of the things me and Colin would talk about is that the food I had as a child was very boring. I mean, we would have spam even in the early 70s. My dad had been given spam, and he kind of quite liked spam, and we would have some, corn. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with corned beef, but we kind of still carried on eating into the 70s, like we were on rationing, and other countries, had maybe moved on a bit more from World War II in some ways, but we were still eating the same diet. I remember when those instant curries came in the 70s, the Vesta curries that were just you put them in the oven, but it was exotic to us. Angel Delight desserts was exotic. So there we are. I'm gonna leave it all now. I will see. I love it when I can say to people, I will see you all in the new year. One of the things I was going to do before Christmas, but I got sidetracked with the new kit and all that kind of stuff, is I was going to do a Battle of the Bulge book review show. I will do a Battle of the Bulge book review show. I might even do it tomorrow in the afternoon. I will decide. I've got the plumber coming tomorrow. That's a long story. I may do it tomorrow, or I may do it like January the 2nd. Then we've got a raft of shows coming up. I've got to get some more scheduled. Zeta's coming back on to talk about the Army Group Commanders. We've got one about a Canadian Jew who served in the Royal Canadian Air Force. We've got various things coming up. But I'm going to love you and leave you. And the success of the sidebar is such that it's much harder to find your bloody questions because the conversation is just so busy. I have to scroll back and can't find stuff. I'm going to say I will see you on the other side. So I on a very serious note, I appreciate that some people out there who are watching, maybe Christmas wasn't that good, or they don't celebrate Christmas, or they have another festival or a religious festival or something else, or that they just feel this time of year is a shit time of year. Other people think it's a great time of year. If you're one of those people out there who doesn't enjoy this time of year, then my sympathies to you, and I hope that you're able to find some solace and comfort elsewhere. I would show the kitty, but she's fucked off somewhere. I'm not going to go and find her and bring her in here. Well, she'll be on at some point, but I can hear her playing with a toy in the corridor. But Happy New Year to you all. I will see you on the other side. Thank you very much again for supporting the channel. This is Paul Woodadge for WW2TV signing off for 2025. Cheers, everybody.